Our ruling federal government is up to some dirty politics which will impact our climate and our future. So that can only mean one thing. Long as I don't break these promises. Promises is a segment I do from time to time about what our politicians are and what generally not doing in the space of progressing our country towards a cleaner and more greener future. And today, I'm going to focus on carbon capture and storage because, well, there's been a lot about it lately in the news. You see, this year, we're seeing unprecedented support by our federal politicians around doing like more coal, more gas, and well, now recently, carbon capture and storage to offset those other dirty things. And well, how they're selling it is by using these proven energy sources as well. It will deliver, and this is their words, not mine, it will deliver cheaper energy, lower emissions, and will keep everyone in jobs. Donations too. So, with 5 new gas basins given the green light for extraction, we need to stop these next steps of like just rubber stamp exercises by shouting from the rooftops just how bad gas is. For instance, the Beetaloo Basin in the Northern Territory if we start mining that, that'll be equivalent to opening up 50 coal-fire powered stations. Yes, that's huge. The Prime Minister, not one to shy away from a few $1 million in donations from gas companies, wants to spend more than $200 million of public money on gas extraction. What? Why? Well, he doesn't get that it's going to speed up our climate collapse, pushing pollution up, but also destroying our water, farmland, and air quality. Not to mention this little golden nugget that I constantly have been saying on this channel, on Twitter, and anywhere that I can put it. So, why do they keep going, right? Doesn't it seem like a smart move? No! And then, well, to add insult to injury, the federal government recently announced that they have plans for the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and ARENA, that's like our renewable energy agencies. They review and fund projects that normally don't burn stuff or pull stuff out of the ground. Instead, is changing the scope of works to include coal and gas projects that include the smallest of margins, to actually get them across the line, to give them the green light. Oh, and his buddy, Angus Taylor, Member of Parliament for Energy and Energy Reductions, ever an oxymoron if ever I heard one. He's like been pushing for gas and coal plants to use carbon capture and storage because, well, in his mind, they're clean and green. So for the next 15 minutes, I'll do an honest assessment on carbon capture and demonstrate the promises of decreased costs to consumers and lower emissions that just don't add up. Carbon capture, use and storage. Note what I just said there? Use. Not just carbon capture, no, because, well, actually, it covers like a broad suite of technologies that can capture up to 100% of CO2 produced like from fossil fuels, either in the electricity generation, industrial processes, or actually even just sourcing the stuff out of the ground. Now, the overarching objective here is to prevent or decrease the amount of CO2 that goes up into the atmosphere, leading to, well, climate change and global warming, water devastation, floods, you name it. But for these guys, it's actually about doing carbon capture and storage because they want to continue to keep using fossil fuels. So, just know this, there are many ways to remove carbon from our environment. So for completeness, I'll do a quick overview and then we'll dive into a few real-world examples as noted in Angus Taylor's paper. First up, trees, plants, and algae. Yes, Mother's Nature gift to the world. Photosynthesis actually removes carbon dioxide naturally, and well, trees were especially good at doing it. For every acre of land restored to forest, about 3 tons of CO2 per year is stored. In Australia, that equates to like a car driving 1 year, 16,000 kilometres. Planting and maintaining a carbon forest is also pretty cheap. It's about $1,500 per 3 acres of land. The problems? Well, land is not always cheap, and you may be actually displacing food, that is area that's normally reserved for growing food, to obviously, capture carbon. But last time I looked in Australia, we're fortunate, we don't have that problem. Next one, and might I say an obvious one, is soil, brown stuff, that naturally stores carbon. It turns out that if farmers keep crops in for as long as they can, it actually improves CO2 retention of soil. This might come at the expense though of like soil quality, but farming techniques have shown considerable changes in recent times with complementary farming practices that aim to rejuvenate soil and improve land usage. Another method is to store carbon in like bioenergy crops. Now, this is actually very controversial and something I'm very much against, so forewarned, yeah. Because basically, the process involves growing plants that in the future will actually be used as fuel. So when you actually use as plants of fuel, they've stored the CO2 and guess what happens? It gets released again. It's recycling. It's very complex recycling, but it kind of defeats the purpose of trying to draw down our CO2. And once again, just like I said with trees, using like plants for fuel in lieu of crops is also a very sticky subject which people don't like to talk about because, well, water use, land use, and well, all of the above stuff I've already said. It's just stupid, and so I choose to ignore it. Then we come to direct air capture. This is the holy grail of the fossil fuel industry and, well, the internal combustion industry as we know it because, well, they just want to keep taking prehistoric juice out of the ground and burning it for as long as they can. This process of chemically scrubbing carbon dioxide directly from ambient air and then storing it either underground or in long-lived products is very appealing, as well it could mean that we can just keep doing what we are doing, ignoring the many other deadly chemicals that come out of the machines that burn stuff. And yeah, don't worry about that particulate matter and deadly car fumes. They only cause like a few 100,000 premature deaths per year and, well, billions of dollars in healthcare costs. No, just don't worry about them. But again, I diverge. The real deal breaker here is that with direct air capture is that it's actually very costly and very energy intensive. It's estimated because, well, this tech is not yet a commercial reality, is that it needs about 7% of all US energy production to remove just 1,000 megatons of carbon dioxide. And what the cost? Well, about $150 to $300 per metric ton over and above your current electricity prices. So, it makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense. No. Use a truck ton, I said truck, a truck ton of energy and we'll throw millions of dollars at a problem that we can actually deal with if we're smart about it and how we actually generate our electricity in the first place. And well, the issue I really have with direct air capture is that it gives the green light to polluters just to keep doing what they are doing. It's akin to how we don't treat patients in medicine. So imagine this little scenario. Poor little Johnny, he's hurt real bad. A lawnmower accident. Oh, cue the sad music. Or maybe dramatic music. Yeah, because this guy's bleeding out. And well, we could just keep giving him blood. But it's just gonna keep spurting out. Yeah, so what do? We actually repair the artery and then we give the patient blood. And what we're doing here with direct air capture is saying that just keep burning stuff. And we don't care if the particulate matter, the PM 2.5, and other yucky, deadly medicine elements get out there. No, just let that happen. We just want to talk about CO2 here. Don't talk about the other stuff. Oh no, we just want to treat the symptom and not the actual problem. Then we have seawater carbon capture, which is much like direct air capture, except that the CO2 is extracted from seawater instead of air. By reducing CO2 concentration in the ocean, what happens is that the water, the ocean that is, actually wants to naturally draw in more CO2 from the air in which it actually is around it. It's an osmosis type of natural balance type of thing. Yeah, osmosis, poor term, but you get the idea. The ocean wants to keep its like homeostasis, and so if it hasn't got enough CO2, it actually gets more into it. Pretty awesome, right? The US Navy actually has a prototype capture device in operation where it converts CO2 trapped in seawater and they convert that, get this, to fuel. Impressive, right? But CO2 extracted from the ocean is then returned to the atmosphere, and well, again, it kind of feels like a bit of Ralph from The Simpsons, doesn't it?
Go apple! Go orange! Go banana!
Another method, and one that struck me as unique, involves spreading ground up olivine. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'll put the word down here. And well, it's actually a cheap green material, and they spread it over sand, where then the ocean waves, they will break it down, and that in turn will pull CO2 from the air. Now, its makers, Project Vesta, say that it will eventually end up as limestone on the ocean floor. Naturally, critics raise the possibility that the olivine could release heavy metals such as like nickel into the environment. So, whilst the possibility of removing CO2 from our environment to the tune of like 1 trillion tons, seriously, that's a big number, is promising, but it's not without its issues. When it comes to coal or gas plants, there are many ways they can try to capture carbon. First up, there's post-combustion capture that involves sending a power plant's emissions through an absorption process. A solvent can capture up to 90% of CO2, and then this goes through a regenerator that strips CO2 from the solvent, whilst remaining emissions, primarily like nitrogen, is vented into the atmosphere. Then there's oxycombustion, whereby fossil fuel is burned in pure oxygen environment instead of like normal air. The result of this process is that it captures nearly all of the CO2. And finally, you have pre-combustion capture, which involves transforming fossil fuels into like a synthetic gas consisting of relatively pure hydrogen and CO2. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to get into how these translate, like for instance, a supercritical CO2 power cycle or a closed Brayton cycle. Just know that you'll hear people say these, and that we in Australia actually had the world's largest carbon capture plant, and well, the technology is proven. But well, the reality, as you're about to learn, is that very few places in the whole world actually do carbon capture. So, watch this. I'm going to count them for you now. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just 5 exist in the whole wide world. Just think how many electricity plants there are, how many coal plants, how many gas power plants, how many solar plants there are, wind farms. You get the idea. There are thousands. And of all those thousands of things in the world, especially the ones that burn fossil fuels, there is just 5 that actually capture carbon. Research into carbon capture and storage actually started way back in the 1930s. That was 90 years ago, folks. And well, it's still not ready for prime time. So let's now look into carbon capture and storage and its application to coal plants. Currently in the world, there are only 2 operating coal power plants with carbon capture. And well, wait a second. One of them's closed. Oh, we've only got 4 now. This coal power plant, named the Boundary Dam Project in Canada, cost $1.4 billion to build. In terms of size, it's actually tiny, only 110 megawatt unit. For comparison, the Hornsdale farm, which actually has got a 150 megawatt hour battery connected to it, that's a Tesla Hornsdale battery, and will associated wind farm, is bigger than this. And the cost of that project, $90 million, and it's already paid itself off. It makes the Boundary Dam like a little bit of an elephant, doesn't it? So, a wind farm and battery that is 14 times cheaper generates 30% more electricity and emits 0 emissions. You gotta wonder for yourself, if that was my money, how did my $1.4 billion even pass the smell test? Next is the Petronova project in America, a $1 billion plant. This system is like being retrofit with a post-combustion CO2 capture system and was supposed to remove 90% of CO2 emissions. But on closer inspection, it turns out that the Petronova power only captured 40% of its emissions. So where do they put this CO2? Well, turns out they put it deep underground to create high pressure to help extract oil from otherwise sources that it wouldn't be recoverable from. Cool and clever indeed. So, carbon capture, use and storage. You get why I stressed that before? Get it? And P.S. Because of its high running costs and its uncompetitive pricing, the Petronova actually has been shut down. What about 2? Oh, we're at only 3 now. Angus! Oh, this doesn't look good for you, dude. No! Now, let's look at carbon capture for gas-fired power plants. Whilst there are no large-scale CCUS projects at gas-fired plants in operation, there is hope and a few promising technologies which should be ready pretty soon. One of them, Net Power, is nearing completion of like a 300 megawatt gas power plant, and it utilizes a mixture of hot CO2 and oxygen, known as oxycombustion. That's like an adapted version of the supercritical carbon dioxide cycle mentioned earlier. The resulting working fluid is like a mix of high pressure CO2 and water, which is then subsequently expanded through a turbine, noting that the turbine is being turned around not by steam but by CO2. The benefit of this system is that no CO2 whatsoever is allowed to escape into the atmosphere. None, zero, nada. Pretty impressive. Engineers are really hopeful that this will produce low cost, flexible power from natural gas while generating no atmospheric emissions and fully capturing carbon dioxide during its process. Very nice, and I'm going to keep an eye on this one. Another one is Zero Gen Project, a 390 megawatt plant at a cost of, wait for it, $1.7 billion. Oh my, just think how many like wind and solar farms you can build with that much money. And hey, Angus, did you talk about the $188 million in government grants they received before abandoning this project? We're not talking about that? Okay. Another CCS gas plant is the Gorgon Natural Gas Facility in WA. Now these guys, they opened in 2016 and they promised to capture up to 40% of CO2 emissions, but they kind of got stuck by the technology and things weren't working right, and yeah, 3 years passed and they finally started in 2019. So whilst this plant is like 3 years behind on its promise to store between 3.4 million to like 4 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions per year, Chevron, they did try for the first 3 years to get a wipe from the deal with the Western Australian government, so they've got some ground to make up. Another example of carbon capture storage is this one, the Kemper Gas Power Plant, a $7.5 billion project which was flawed and doomed to fail before it even got started. In an explosive article written by Sharon Kelly, she revealed how executives knew of construction problems and design flaws years before the scheme collapsed. Are you kind of getting a clearer picture on what's happening here? Billions of dollars spent on carbon capture for gas and coal, yet just 3 actually exist in operation today, and very little CO2 has been removed from the atmosphere so far. Wonder why that is. Okay, so that was a quick summary of most technological developments to date. And well, I gotta say, I actually learned a lot of stuff doing this research. Yes, I did. But I must say, the issues that came up time and time again, and I kind of glanced over a little bit, was that for all of these projects, build price and return on investment and operating costs were just so far above anything and everything else, like from gas and coal, that they just weren't actually viable. Retrofitting systems is difficult, it takes time, and it's costly. Returning to the carbon capture and use storage plants like the Petra Nova, there hasn't been a financial success in 3 years it's been operating. Boundary Dam abandoned its plans to retrofit another CCS units to its plant. Why? Because again, they're not profitable and were far more costly to run than a similar coal or gas power plant, let alone compete with like renewables of wind and solar, which are cheaper and will obviously far greener. So if you're in the business of making electricity and money, no matter how you generate it, coal, gas, hydro, battery storage and more, you need a return on investment. If you've sunk billions of dollars, which we've seen demonstrated so far, and that sunk cost, that money's gone, guess what? It's going to have to pay itself off, doesn't it? If CCS gas and coal power plants work, they actually cost 10 to 15 times that of a renewable project. And well, they're actually smaller in their energy capacity, meaning that they're uneconomic and well, a white elephant if ever there was one. They just can't compete with wind farms which get their fuel for free from the wind, and well, solar farms which also get their fuel for free from the sun. carbon capture and storage for gas and coal plants, they can't compete. They're more expensive to run, and that means higher prices for consumers, higher emissions, and more massively expensive assets that will be abandoned in the very near future because, well, investors, they will divest. Banks will pour their money. And this thing called stranded assets, that's a real problem to us as taxpayers because we're going to end up paying for the build of them. And then banks in the very near future are saying, we're not going to support something that isn't giving us money back. Close it down. Close it down. And then we all suffer. So let's take a look at what a gas power plant with carbon capture and storage could look like here. This 667 megawatt power plant produced in 1 year 22,000 tons of carbon. Assuming we can add on a carbon capture unit and reduce CO2 by 90%, that will mean like 2.2 tons of CO2 per year. Not bad, yeah? But let's be generous. Let's assume they can install like a 100% CO2-free alarm cycle device, yeah? And well, now, no CO2 in the atmosphere whatsoever. Great? No, it isn't, because guess what? The gas still emits more than 3.7 million tons in fugitive emissions per year. Fugitive emissions? Nah, it's not my favorite character. Nope, it's basically where in the extraction phase of getting gas out the ground, it escapes into the air. When they're transporting it, it escapes into the air. When they're transferring it, it escapes into the air. It's a fugitive emissions. It gets away. And well, currently that contributes about 7% of our total CO2 for Australia. And when you compare gas or coal to renewables, they don't stack up. Right now, I'm imagining my keyboard warriors madly typing away saying, "But Chris, anything that is manufactured has a CO2 debt." To which I say, yes it does. It does indeed. For instance, a wind turbine has a CO2 debt of this much. But did you know that its energy balance, that's the amount of time it needs to actually be in operation to offset, to mitigate the CO2 that it created during its manufacture, is only, drumroll, just 7.7 months. 7.7 months. Remember that number, folks. So, for something that's going to run for at least 20 years or more, it's paying off its carbon debt more than 30 times over. And while solar, it takes just 1.5 years. So again, the material CO2 debt covered in the first 1/25th of its life. And after that, it's carbon negative. These carbon capture and storage units, they will always produce CO2 because there's no such thing as clean coal. And there's no such thing as clean gas. Australia has world-class energy resources and the highest average solar radiation per square kilometre of any continent. We are of many strengths in energy technology, research, as well as education and technical skills. We are the world leader in off-grid renewables and have the world's largest lithium reserve and also lots of nickel too. Elon. So, if done right, we can export clean electricity by cable intercontinentally or by ship filled up with clean hydrogen fuel. Carbon capture, gas and coal, they just can't compete with renewables. These projects cost way too much and they'll be abandoned, costing taxpayers dearly. Carbon capture, gas and coal are not clean. Greenhouse gas emissions are rising. They're leading to a range of impacts onto the climate, health, agriculture, water security, disaster risk management, and well, the economy. Investing in these outdated energy methods will not only mitigate or reduce these potentially devastating issues that we, really, my kids, your kids, will have to deal with. And what I really dislike is that this government is taking money from ARENA and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and funneling it to fossil fuel companies. That's like taking money from the healthcare budget and funding tobacco. It's just wrong. It's so wrong. So, viewers, let's call out this government for its lies and demand better from them. If we're going to invest in a cleaner and greener future, it's not by continuing to support what we've done since the Industrial Revolution. It's time to grow up, Get with the times. Start governing for all of Australia, not just the companies who don't pay any tax and profit on the world's warming.